Thank you very much. My name is Taylor Reynolds. I'm an economist at the OECD here in Paris, and I focus on the information economy. This is an increasingly important area in the OECD, and we're very happy to be invited here to talk about something that we think is extremely important. Now, if you visit us at the OECD, just a few kilometers down the road here, over the past 3 years, there's been one subject on the mind of everyone at the OECD, and it can be summed up with one word: crisis. That's because economies in the OECD have been in crisis for the past 3 to 4 years, and we are constantly looking for ways to get countries out of the crisis and actually prevent the next crises from happening. So a lot of our occupation over the past several years has been on crisis management for OECD countries. However, if you come visit us at the OECD and you come see me on the second floor, you will find a very different mentality. And that's because I work in the sector, the information economy, that is the one bright spot in OECD economies over the past 10 years. So if I can show you here, this shows revenues of the top 250 ICT firms in OECD countries, and you can see that from the year 2000 and on, right after the dot-com bubble, we've seen pretty much continuous growth over the past 10 years. The same can be said for employment. So when we talk about the ICT sector and jobs, we see that employment has continued to grow despite this terrible crisis that most of our countries have been going through. And then there's been a huge amount of investment as well in this sector. You can see that R&D investment has continued to grow despite the crisis, with just a small blip in the year 2009. Now this is important, and there's two reasons that we think this has happened. The first is because you have this switch to mobile phones. So we have gone from a society where policymakers are trying to connect PCs on every desk to the internet to one where people are now walking around with mobile phones with internet access in their pockets. This is a huge change in the mentality of the economy, because now we can access everyone, anywhere, and at any time. The second thing that's important here is when you do have companies and countries in crisis, one of the most important things for them to do is find ways to reduce costs and improve their efficiency. So what they've done is they've actually invested in ICTs as a way to make themselves more profitable. So you can see that this investment has helped push the sector along. Now, I've come and I've told you that the ICT sector is actually doing very well, but we can actually do better. When we take a look at one of the countries that's leading the OECD and in fact the world in terms of broadband access, we look at Korea. And if you look at broadband penetration, computer penetration, and PC penetration in Korea, we have near universal access. Now to us, this is extremely important because that means the infrastructure is in place to take advantage of the digital economy. But if we actually go with a little more precision and we say, what percentage of these firms in Korea actually have a website? The number drops down to roughly 60%. Then we say, how many of these firms have made a purchase online? That means they've done a purchase online. The number drops to 50%. But I think one of the most shocking numbers to come out of this is how many of these Korean firms have actually sold something online. And you can see that at the end of 2009, the number was only 10%. So here's a country with world-class infrastructure where only 10% of firms have sold something online. If we look at the situation in Europe, we have more recent data for Europe, you can see that the number of companies that have actually received orders online in Europe is only 17%. So the infrastructure may be in place, but we're not using it as efficiently as we should. So why is this important? Why is this important for our economies? Well, it's because the internet has become what we call in the OECD a general purpose technology. That means it's very similar to roads, to sewers, and to the electricity network. It actually supports all sectors of the economy. So we realize at the OECD how important the internet is, but often it's difficult for us to get the attention of policymakers. The ministries of communications get this, but it's very difficult for us to communicate this importance to the economic ministries, to the Ministry of Culture, to the Ministry of the Environment, just how important the internet is. And the only way to get the attention of policymakers is with numbers. So what we did is we organized a meeting last year where we called together 50 leading experts from around the globe to come talk about methodologies for measuring the internet economy. We wanted to have the best people in the room to figure out how can we measure the impact of the internet economy so that we can use this with policymakers. And what we did is we brought them all in, we developed a methodology, and we actually put this methodology to use with very good data that we had from the United States. So what we did is we pulled in this data from National System of National Accounts in the US, so official US data, and here are the results. We were able to find that up to 13% of US business sector value added can be attributed to internet-related activities in 2010. Now let me put that in non-economic speak. What that means is the value created by businesses in the US economy, 13% of that can be linked back to internet-related activities. That shows how important this sector is to the entire economy. Now, to give you some numbers on this, that works out to be 1.1 trillion US dollars, or in euro terms, about 920 billion euros. So we're talking about an extremely important segment of the economy there in the US. Now, this is important because we want policymakers to understand that any policies they make, whether it be in the communication sector, the cultural sector, the economic sector, you need to take into account what effect will this have on the internet, because the internet is a source of economic growth. Now, I wanted to also show you the situation of France, and I wanted to say, where does France stand right now? Is there room for improvement? So when we look at the data and we see how businesses are using the internet in OECD countries, we get this picture. So it may be hard to read the slides, but you can see at the very top of the list, you've got Switzerland, New Zealand, and Canada, where above 70% of firms are actually reporting that they use the internet for purchasing. France is listed, is the little red mark here, and that's around 20%. So there is a huge gap between the leading countries where businesses are using the internet, and then France and some other European countries at the bottom end of the scale. Now, when we say these are the companies that are actually buying online, what about when we look at selling online? So this is the next step. Again, you have certain countries that are doing much better, with 40 to 50% of their firms reporting sales over the internet. But then you have France that reports about 10% of sales over the internet. So for us, this shows that there's actually a lot of room and a lot of potential for France to grow. But one of the things we need to do is we need to look at what are the policies that can actually make this happen. And I was very happy to come to this workshop, to this meeting, the Big Tent meeting today, because you are actually addressing some of these issues that can help push France up into the top levels. Now, to conclude here, I just want to point out one thing. We see that, and summarize, the ICT sector is the sector where we are seeing growth during the economic crisis. So countries within the OECD and countries around the world have a reason to try and push and become countries that have a comparative advantage, countries that focus on digital economy issues. Now, that's important because you can be in the group where you are creating the digital economy, or you can be in the group of countries where you actually buy goods and services from other countries in the digital economy. And I think France needs to be in the first group, which is producing digital economy goods for the entire world. Thank you very much.